So just to frame it up a little bit, most of you have been to many of the Finance Committee meetings, but we thought it would be helpful as you move forward to vote next week to understand the process that we've been through. So Alicia is going to walk us through the work that was done at the Finance Committee meeting. Won't go into every option. We did a lot of that at the previous board workshop, but we'll walk through how we went from the original budget, so my budget, the March 6th budget, to the 4.5% budget, what was included in that, and then what was not adopted from those proposed reductions at last week's meeting, so that everybody sort of comes full circle to how we got to the $11 million budget from the $13.6 million budget. So with that, Alicia.
Okay. So tonight we're just going to talk about how we got from the superintendent's proposed budget of $113.4 million. We came to the Finance Committee with some recommended cuts, and the goal was to get to a 4.5% tax increase. These were not cuts that were really supported by the superintendent, which we discussed at the meeting, but they were cuts that got us to the number that we were aiming to get to. That budget that we discussed was $109,602,820, and was made up of the following reductions. So what this shows is the reductions that were proposed in order to get to that $109 million budget, and I'm just going to read through them very quickly. So you'll notice some nice red and green highlighting here, and basically what this shows is the green were cuts that in the end were supported by the Finance Committee, and the red cuts were not supported by the Finance Committee. So we'll talk in a few minutes on another page of what sort of is in the Finance Committee budget before you now. So for the most part, it's the green highlights that you'll see that are in front of you now. So there were administrative reductions of approximately $1 million. There's a note beside here that shows that this was reduced by $179,000. We discussed this in executive session earlier today. The next proposal was to cut middle school electives. This was approximately 2 elective courses at each school. This was not supported by the Finance Committee. There was a proposal to increase elementary class sizes. The net reduction would be 7 teachers across all elementary schools. This was not supported by the Finance Committee. There was a proposal to reduce elementary world language. This was a FTE of 4.5 teachers across all the elementary schools. This was not supported by the Finance Committee. One proposal was to close both Peaks School and Cliff Schools, and that would have resulted in the shown savings there, and in the end this was not supported by the Finance Committee. There's a proposal to reallocate or to recognize that there are 4 ELL EdTech positions that are no longer serving their original intent. So essentially this is right-sizing that group. So that's 4 positions for a savings of $186,000. This was supported by the Finance Committee. You'll see this in the final Finance Committee budget. There is a retirement incentive proposed in this budget. It was supported by the Finance Committee. It recognizes 18 teaching positions across the budget. Essentially, it shows the teacher getting a one-time $10,000 payment, and then us replacing them at a lower level, thus resulting in savings across those 18 positions. There was a proposal to reduce the 2 school resource officers for $118,000. That was not supported by the Finance Committee. There was also a proposal to reduce 8 crossing guard positions. That was not supported by the Finance Committee. There are 2 facility reductions. I'll show you the backup in a few minutes. One is in HVAC services. Those are services that we will not be provided. The other is requests our increase in athletic field maintenance to be cut in half. So we would realize that additional $25,000 of the increase in the FY20 budget. That was supported by, those 2 cuts were supported by the Finance Committee. There was a proposal to cut board contingency by $100,000. In the end, that was not supported by the Finance Committee. And finally, there was recognizing that both the middle school and elementary schools had significant cuts involved. We asked the high schools to come up with a similar level of reduction. And then finally, those were not supported by the Finance Committee. So what was supported by the Finance Committee is this level of cuts. So this shows you the cuts that we just talked about, and I'm trying to make this a little bigger. So this shows, one thing you'll notice here, and I mentioned before, there were some reductions of $178,000 in the administrative cuts due to some feedback, again, that we received in executive session. So the final administrative cut total is $825,000, and those other amounts are shown here, the Electives, retirement incentive, and facilities. And then finally, on March 30th, which is when we were holding the vote, we had just been previously notified that our health insurance rate increase was 7.66% as opposed to the 9% that was in the budget. So we estimated that we would save approximately $68,100. So this resulted in the $1.4 million reduction from the superintendent's proposed budget to the Finance Committee recommended budget of $111.9. This is an expenditure increase of $6.2 million, about 5.9%. One thing that I think is important for everyone to understand, that in that expenditure increase is approximately $2 million of new debt. So that, is approximately a third of this total. So our expenditure increase, not including the new Hall School debt, is about $4.3 million, or just over 4% over last year. So at the Finance Committee, we calculated that this would result in an 80-cent tax increase from our current tax rate of $10.61 to a tax rate of $11.41, which is about a 7.5% increase. I did hear from the city's finance director today with some news that the city will be using a updated valuation number, which is, instead of using $7.83 billion, they're going to be using $7.9 billion. So that we should also be using that on our side. So that changes the tax rate from $11.41 to $11.31, which is an increase of 70 cents, or about 6.62% over last year. And then finally, as we were putting together this budget and inputting the actual rates that we receive from MEA, BT, the health insurance actual savings ended up at $113,000 as opposed to $68,000. So in the book that you received tonight, there's a line item on the very end showing that difference. It's about $45,000, $45,230. You'll see in the expenditure budget, with a footnote that requests that someone at the 412 meeting make an amendment to reduce the budget by that amount, because right now it's artificially higher by that amount because of sort of what we had projected earlier. So at that rate of spending, we're at 111.9, so it's 45,000. Our expenditure increase, less debts, 3.99, and our newly calculated tax rate using the new valuation is 6.57%. So I did want to just show you again. We've presented these earlier. These have been reviewed at Finance Committee in detail, but these are just sort of some of the backup that shows the calculation of each of these reductions. So these are the 4 EdTech positions that we had discussed. This visually shows the 18, the calculation for the 18 teacher retirements with the $10,000 incentive. It calculates the salary and benefits for each of those positions, what we would hire people back at, obviously the savings, and then what the savings is less the incentive. So that's the $273,000 that we have in our reduction. And the last two items just outline where we reduce those contracted services. So as I mentioned, this is in HVAC and in grounds maintenance. And that is the total I have to update you on sort of the changes in the Finance Committee budget. I do have one other item just to update you with. The Joint Finance Committee meeting on Thursday is here at 5:30. It's actually been moved to council chambers from room 209 so that there'll be more room for people who want to attend that meeting. And I did, again, when I spoke to the finance director for the city today, we went through the timeline, and I did confirm that we would be presenting the budget on April 18th. That is the Wednesday over April break, but that's when the meeting is. I also wanted to highlight for you, and this is new on the schedule, and it's not confirmed at this point if we will have it, but in the past, the council has referred the budget to Finance Committee, so there is the potential for us to go to Finance Committee, and that would be on April 26th if that does happen. So that's something we'll just need to wait and see if, and we can certainly talk about that on Thursday if they anticipate that we will go back to Finance Committee after we present our budget. But assuming they decide that we do, we will have a meeting on the 26th. The board or the city council will have first reading of our budget on May 7th. The public hearing will be that same day. The final reading of our budget would be Monday, May 14th, and that would coincide with the first reading of the city budget, where they would have public hearing for the entire city budget. So they would roll in the city portion of the budget that evening as well. And that is the timeline. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, Ms. Morioni.
First of all, can I say thank you so much. I mean, you have worked tirelessly, the staff, the superintendent. I don't think we've said that enough along this process. We just sit in the meetings and listen to but all of this work that you've done time and time again, asked for very difficult information to pull. You've worked very diligently, and I really want to say thank you. It's been amazing. On that note, looking at the list of, and I also want to say thank you to our finance chair and our finance committee members. I wasn't at the Friday meeting, and I woke up elated to know that there was a big shift in the thought process, and not as detrimental, and where we were potentially going to be ending up, in my opinion. I know it's not done, but I'm much happier and can sleep a bit better. But going back to proposed cuts for just a minute, I'm okay understanding the ELL ed tax, the readjustment there. Definitely on board with retirement incentives. I'm still not loving the administrative cuts, and I'm still not loving facilities. And I'll skip the administrative cuts just for a minute and go to facilities. And most importantly, for facilities, maybe you can help me understand a bit under the $25,000 on athletic fields playground one. And just to walk me through there, help me understand which ones are we talking about potentially? I mean, how specific information do we have, and how?
FY17, I believe. FY17 was, I believe, the first year. So FY16 was about $100,000 that Portland Public Schools was paying back to the city, and the proposal was for it to go to $150,000. And at the time, I think, there was no appetite for increasing it in that year, so it didn't go up. And then in the next year, last year actually, they phased in some of that increase. So last year we were at 150,000, and this year we were supposed to phase in sort of the rest of that increase. But due to the situation that we're in right now, we're asking that we can phase that in over 2 years. Certainly, this is built into the city's budget, and that's something we're going to need to discuss with them. So that certainly could mean a reduction in services, as they're going to have to make that up on their side. I will say, though, that the reimbursable total back to the city is the $324,000. So perhaps if we decided that we couldn't reduce on the athletic side, that perhaps we could reduce elsewhere on services that they provide for us. So that's something we're going to have to work out with them.
And the reason why I mention it is because let's just take Deering football field, for example. Fitzpatrick got a new football field, new field. And I know this is all a lot with the city's decision of which they're going to do, but it's been promised that the Deering football field would be redone, and I believe it was going to be this coming year that they would be getting a new turf. And just recently, with the snow plow removal, they had snow plows out there removing the snow on the turf, and if you go on that turf right now, it's completely a mess. It's all ripped up, all the blacktops kind of off of the turf. It's just a mess, and so just I just kind of want to know more about the plan for funding that and to get that redone, because it has been continually promised and then it keeps getting pushed back, and now it's actually becoming more of a danger to have our student athletes on that field the way it is today. So yeah,
I believe that's in the city CIP this year.
It's in the city CIP?
It is in the city
Okay,
CIP.
well, that's a relief. Sorry. So when is it scheduled for?
It's on this year's
This year still.
recommended CIP.
So that's not going to get cut. This is not a cut we're talking about.
No, this is the upkeep of the fields, the chargeback that the city gives us for use of those fields. And again, they've gone from 100,000 to what was proposed as 200,000 in the last couple of years. And I understand that, for many years that it had been fixed at 100,000. So this was a phased-in increase in how much we pay them for the services that they provide to keep those fields. So what we're doing is we're sort of asking for that to be phased in over 3 years instead of over 2 years. So going from 100 to 150 to 200, we're asking that it go from 100 to 150 to 175 this year, and then to 200 next year.
So it doesn't sound like it's going to necessarily impact,
That's easy for me to say. I don't know that the city would agree with that. So
Right.
that's
So it's still a
25,000
matter
on
of
their
them.
budget that, they'll have to figure out how to, either to reduce services, which is what Alicia was saying, or, in some other way, offset that sort of slowdown in the increase.
okay. All right, well, that, like I said, and the administrative cuts piece of it, that's still still difficult for me, particularly when some of those positions were one that were going to help us with more of the investment in our academics in particular. So I think that's all for my questions right now, but, and I'm thrilled to hear about the valuation numbers that came in today. That was a huge,
Yes.
huge
Good
bonus.
news.
Yeah.
I was very happy.
Yeah. Thank you, Alicia.
Can I ask, I've been doing some research, so I actually already know the answer to this, but I just want to make it clear to everybody. Well, I'll ask it as a question. The multiple year projection includes the buildings for our future bond.
It does. So it anticipates that we would see the first of an escalating 6 years of payments starting in FY20.
And as I recall, it starts with about $500,000 next year.
Almost $1 million. It's
Okay.
970,000.
And then that's the increase that happens
Approximately the increase
yearly.
every year.
Okay.
Year 6.
And so we have the 5 years out, the multi-year projection. does that reach the cap, or is there?
Doesn't. That actually only shows the first 4 years. So we'd have 2 additional years beyond that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Welcome.
Anyone else?
I guess I'll ask one more. The other thing I've been thinking about is, the projection is that we're going to reach eventually this minimum receiver level from the state. And again, I guess looking at that multi-year projection, is that the end of the subsidy cuts, or will that continue to go down
So
from
no,
there?
that doesn't show us becoming a minimum receiver. I think at our lowest point, it probably shows us receiving about $9 million, which, I mean, in contrast, is $8 million less than we receive right now. So it cuts it in half, but it's not all of it. So we're not there yet.
Okay, so yeah, I think maybe it even got to 6. I'm not sure exactly. I don't have it in front of me, but. So what is the base, right? Because they do, the state, there is a minimum, right?
So essentially, if it gets to the point that your valuation essentially requires more than the total allocation, they start cutting back your mill rate, so it essentially evens out. There, I don't think, is a minimum required amount that they're supposed to give you. Even the debt service reimbursement that we receive for our state-funded schools is subject to the formula, so there could be a point that we would not receive reimbursement for that debt service as well. So I'll have to get back to you on sort of what that minimum baseline is, but it does not include all of the things that you would assume that we are guaranteed to receive.
Great.
Marnie?
Just a question. We've been saying, okay, the superintendent's proposed budget would be about $20 per month on the average household. What would I can't do the math, but what would this be more or less than a month for an average household? Like what we're...
My calculator doesn't want to open, but I'll go get it. Hold on.
It'd just be a really good say, okay, we brought it down to now this amount a month. For simple minds like me that like to see,
Javier likes to tease me that I always have my calculator in hand and see what happens when I don't. So the original estimate was that it would be $238, and currently it'd be $168 on a $240,000 home.
And so
a year,
that's it.
Annually for the school budget.
162.
168.
168, okay.
And that's using the 6.5 figure?
And that's using the tax rate of 11.
So about $14 a month.
So I did the 70 cents would be the increase that we saw over last year.
Okay.
So that's the calculation.
About $14 a month.
Yes.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No? I don't have much to add at this point, except that I did want to echo Marnie's comments of thank you to staff and to the Finance Committee. I wasn't able to make the Friday meeting either, and so I was equally kind of woke up to the news, and I know that the committee has really grappled with this over several meetings, and I know that the whole board has really been participating in the process, and it's been a lot of late hours for all of us and heavy lifting, so thank you to everybody, and thank you to staff for all your preparation. Any last thoughts? No? Okay. Then we'll conclude the workshop.